What's up YouTube? KS Gun Guy here to talk about a couple of carry options. These are pretty common carry options, very popular. I do love them both. They're great guns. Right now I'm only carrying one of the two. I'll share a couple of stories about the other one along the way. It's just not where I'm comfortable carrying it just yet, but hopefully we'll get there with a little bit more work and a little bit more fiddling with it. But again, we'll get to that momentarily. So I've got with me a couple of great options here, one being the Glock 43 and the other being the Smith & Wesson Shield, both of which great carry options. I consider them very similar to each other, largely because they're both single stack 9mm firearms. With the Shield, you do have a couple of other options. You can get it in a 40, and now you can get it in a 45. More to come on that here shortly. But for right now, I'm really focusing on the 9mm. I much prefer 9mm. I think it's more cost-effective to shoot. I think it has plenty of stopping power if something horrible did happen. It's just a more practical firearm for me. But your mileage may vary on that. Anyways, both of these guns have been safety checked, but just in case you do want to see, there's the Glock 43 right there. And here is the Shield. These just both got back from the range and are freshly cleaned. So, what's the same and what's different about both of these? Let's first talk about specs on both of these. So, for the Glock 43, the overall length on the Glock 43 is 6.26 inches. Its height is 4.25 inches. That is with a magazine. I'll go ahead and throw a magazine in there. As you can see, the magazine is empty. Will remain so for the rest of the video. Its width is 1.02 inches according to the Glock website, so 1.20 inches, just a hair over an inch, and I certainly talk about an inch being a key factor in everyday carry, defining on whether it's a very thin inside the waist band firearm or over an inch being potentially an outside the waistband carry, or for a lot of people still inside the waistband, but an inch seems to be a good defining width there. The barrel length on this is 3.39 inches. The weight on this unloaded is 17.95 ounces. Its loaded weight is 22.36 ounces. Now, as far as magazines go, the stock magazines with the Glock are 6-round magazines, and that's been a source of contention or controversy for people ever since the Glock 43 came out, that its magazine capacity was a little bit low. It does come with 2 magazines, and one of which actually has a finger rest on it, so it does extend it just a little bit down, but it does not add an extra round. That was a real disappointment for people. So what I did with the extra magazine, and I've got a couple of these actually, I put a Strike Industries +2 base plate on this. So that does that does extend its grip quite a bit. I will tell you, it's extremely comfortable to shoot with this in it. It's a little bit ungangly, but it's very comfortable to shoot, and it adds what I consider critical 2 more rounds to it. I wouldn't carry it like this, of course. I think it defeats the purpose, adding so much length to this, and it really becomes almost a full-length or full-frame firearm at that point in time. So this will be a great backup magazine. I still prefer the flush fit because I do like the short magazines on this, and I have no problem having my pinky hang down from a firearm. It's the same with a lot of these very small single stack or even double stack firearms where you don't have a pinky. That's okay with me. And you'll notice I've added the Talon grip onto this. I think it's vital, especially for these thin firearms, to be able to get a little bit more grip and a little bit more traction on it. So you'll see that with the Shield as well. I'm a big proponent of that. On full-size firearms, not quite so much, but certainly on the small firearms. So how does that stack up against the Shield? The Shield's a little bit bigger firearm, not by a lot, but every every tenth of an inch and every ounce does make a difference for sure. This is still, again, a single stack firearm, so we're going to be looking at some very similar stats here. So the overall length on the Shield is going to be 6.1 inches. The overall height, then I'll put a magazine in this, unloaded magazine of course. The overall height is 4.6 inches. The width of the Shield is 0.95 inches. So according to Smith & Wesson's website, it is just a little bit thinner than the Glock 43. Of course, we'll put them up against each other so you can take a better look side by side. The barrel length on the Shield is 3.1 inches, so just a slightly shorter barrel than the Glock 43. The weight was kind of hard to locate. I located two different weights for the Shield. According to Smith & Wesson's website, it weighs 19 ounces even, but on several other websites and reviews, published reviews, I found that it was 20.8 ounces. So I would say it's gonna fall somewhere between the 19 and 20 ounce, depending on who you talk to. I was not able to find a loaded weight, but I would add between 3.5 and 4 ounces to that. So you're going to come in roughly around 23 to 24 ounces loaded. That's my estimate. Share your comments below if I've got that off at all, but still very much a doable carry gun. As far as magazines go, one thing I do give credit to Smith & Wesson and to the Shield for, their magazines are higher capacity than the Glock 43. Straight out of the box, we've got a 7-round magazine, and that's going to be your flush fit magazine. I'll throw that back in the gun here for a moment. I talked about a pinky hanging off the Glock 43. I can almost hang my pinky right on the firearm here. I don't generally. I still hang it down or keep it loose when I'm shooting, but I really can grip it if I want to. There's just a little bit more there. Now the other magazine that comes with the Shield is actually going to be an 8-round extended magazine, and I think that's great. Kudos to Smith & Wesson for including a 7 and an 8-round magazine, and that extension is certainly doable for your pinky to rest on. Very comfortable at the range. Very easy to shoot. I still prefer the flat base plate. Certainly from a carry standpoint, I like to keep as little signature on the grip, on the overall height as possible. But again, great options from Smith. Good job. You don't have to run out and get any aftermarket parts or anything like that. I know there are aftermarket parts for these. I think Mag Guts is a popular choice. I'm not a big fan. I don't think it's that critical. I think 7 and 8 rounds plus 1 is more than fine for a self-defense carry gun. All right, so let's stack these guys up together and see how they compare. I'll go ahead and put our empty magazines, just flat magazines, in here and try and line them up. Now, even though the barrel length on the Shield is going to be just a little bit shorter, the overall length between the two, and the Shield is, I don't know, I think it was 0.16 inches shorter than the 43. Really, from my vantage point, there's not a lot of difference between the two. They really stack up quite well to each other. And then as far as width goes, I did report that the Glock 43 is just a hair wider, although when I look at the two, I almost feel like the 43 is a little bit thinner, but they are basically the same. Both very comfortable single stack, both coming in right around an inch. The Glock just a fraction over, and the Shield just a fraction under, but basically the same. So how do these stack up against a couple of different options here? I did bring in a couple of different options to show, one of which is the Glock 26. Let's make sure that that is empty. I do have a magazine in it, but everything is empty. Hopefully you can see. Go and close that up. I'll stack these guys up against each other. So the Glock 26, it's probably better to look at length here. The Glock 26 stacks up quite nicely against the 43 and the Shield from a length standpoint. From a height standpoint, the Shield does stand a little bit taller. In fact, it stands a little bit taller than both the 43 and the 26, not by a lot, but by a little bit. Now, the 26 is going to be what I would consider in a different category because it is a double stack magazine. This is going to be a 10+1 versus the standard 6+1 with the 43 if you don't have any sort of a base plate extension, and the 7+1 with the Shield. So the Glock does have a couple of extra rounds in it, so it's got a little bit of an advantage there. But because of that, I don't know how well you can see that. I'll try and stack all these guys up here. The Glock, a lot of people with the 26 and the 27 used to call it a little bit of a chunk, even though it was the baby Glock for a long time. Yeah, it's I don't know, 1.26 inches, I believe, in width. So it's going to be a little bit wider, but it's not that much wider. So certainly a doable carry gun. But if width is a major consideration for you, then perhaps the 26 is not the way to go. Now another comparison between the two, this is actually going to be the Shield 45. Now, I don't have a magazine with it right now. It's a current carry, so I wanted to make sure that I didn't have a loaded magazine. I will, however, show you that the barrel is clear, of course. So the 45 with the base plate is actually going to stand just a little bit taller than both the Shield 9 and the 43. As far as length goes, the 45 does have it in the length by just a couple of tenths of inches. And it also weighs just a little bit more. I don't have the stacks. I'll try and put the stacks below for the Shield 45. But it is just a hair bigger. I will say that the 45 at the range is a ton of fun to shoot. It's a great gun, even though it's a single stack, pretty small 45 caliber gun. You can actually shoot this quite a bit. The grip on this is a little bit aggressive, but you really can shoot a couple 200-300 rounds before your hand's a little bit raw. I'll do a full video on this at a later time, but I did want to stack it up against these other two, just to give you an idea of a couple of quick differences on this. All right, so let's talk a little bit about triggers on these. A lot of you guys know that Glocks are no strangers to changing parts out with guns. It's extremely easy to do. You can sit down and watch a YouTube video or two and change out just about any part you want. The Glock 43 does not have quite as many aftermarket parts as maybe the 26 or 19, 17, or 27, any of the other larger frame guns. They're going to have a lot more options, but the Glock 43 definitely has options to it. I have kept this stock except for a couple of things. I do have a ghost edge connector in here. To me, it doesn't lower the poundage on the trigger pull, really. It just smooths it out a little bit. And then I did polish all the internals, that infamous 25-cent trigger job. I went ahead and did that. As far as the trigger pull goes, one thing I really like about Glocks, and I've said this before, they've got very predictable triggers. They all feel, generally speaking, the same. Now, when you start tweaking with parts on the inside, of course, that's going to change things just a little bit, but they're still very predictable. So your take-up, there is just a little bit of take-up on this particular Glock 43. There is not a lot. And then there's just a little bit of a wall, but not much, because that ghost edge connector does smooth it out quite a bit. And then there's your pull. I would say, and I don't have a trigger gauge, unfortunately. I wish I did. But I would say this falls in the 6.5 pound range, which is perfectly fine because it's a smooth trigger, and I don't mind this being a little bit heavier of a trigger. Now the reset, very audible reset, and again that trigger pull, and there's that reset. It's a great trigger. It's a little heavy, but again, I don't mind it at all. It's very predictable. Now, one thing about the trigger weight, and I did shoot a little bit earlier today, both of these guns side by side. I will say the 43, I'm not as accurate with it. It does just fine. I'm still able to get center mass shots at 7 to 10 yards without a problem, but it's not as exact. I'm okay with that. I don't consider these precision firearms by any stretch of the imagination. These are concealed carry, save your life guns, in my opinion. So as long as I'm putting rounds on center mass, easily and comfortably, I'm okay with that. Now the trigger on the Shield. Trigger on the Shield, and a little bit of a story on the trigger. When I bought this Shield, I decided to get an Apex Duty package. It didn't come with a different trigger. I really don't mind this trigger, but all of the internals were swapped out. And it certainly lightened the trigger. It lightened it quite a bit. In fact, I would say it was probably weighing in somewhere between 3 and 4 pounds. That was way too light. You sneeze on it the wrong way and it has a potential to go off. So I have since taken some of the internals back out. I've actually taken the sear, the trigger spring, and the sear spring back out. I did leave the plunger and the plunger spring in it, but everything else I put back to stock, and that added about 1.5 pounds back to it, and it's still a light trigger. It's a smooth trigger, but it does have a little bit more weight to it. So here's our take up. There isn't really any creep. There is certainly a wall, and then a nice break. And one thing I like about the Shield, I like more than certainly the older big frame M&P firearms. It's got an audible reset. That was something that was a real criticism of early adopted M&P firearms, the bigger frame firearms. Their reset was pretty anemic. This one is tactile and it is audible, and I do like that quite a bit. It's out a little ways. I'll do this one more time. So it's not the kind of reset that's right up against the wall, unfortunately. And with those other Apex parts, it was a shorter reset. I do have to give them credit there, but it was less audible, less tactile, and again, the trigger was just too light. I was also getting some light primer strikes. I've put maybe 500, 550 rounds through this, and I've had 3 light primer strikes. I don't know if that's the ammo. I use, generally speaking, Winchester white box 115 grain ammo. However, I was mixing in some 124 grain Winchester and also some 147 grain Brownings, and I'll show you that a little bit later on. Is it Brownings? Yeah, Brownings. So I'll show you that ammo a little bit later. I've been very impressed with that. I didn't have any light primer strikes with that, but the Winchester white box, the 115 grain, I think 2 of them were 115 grain and 1 was the 124 grain. So I'm not carrying this just yet. I really want to make sure that it's got, I'd say, between 300 and 500 rounds without light primer strikes. I did not have one today, which I'm very happy about, but I only put 150 rounds through it today just to do a comparison between it and the 43. So it's got a little ways to go before I feel comfortable. And the gunsmith at my local gun shop, Centerfire Shooting Sports, they don't think that the parts that I swapped out have anything to do with it. They think it might be the firing pin spring. I'm inclined to agree with that. That part was not swapped out with the Apex kit. I don't think the Apex kit comes with any firing pin spring or components, but time will tell on this. We'll replace the firing pin spring if it continues to do that. So not carrying this just yet. I hope to carry it soon, but I want to make sure that it is that I'm comfortable with it and it's reliable. So more to come on that. All right, let's talk about the sights on both of these guns. Now, I am not a proponent of the Glock stock sights, the polymer sights with the U or field goal sight in the rear. I'm not a fan at all. I think polymer sights leave you open to potential problems, one of which being one might snap off, you might be cleaning it, bang it up against a table, or if you're in a life or death situation, if you have to do any sort of a one-handed slide rack against a table or a belt or anything like that, that polymer sight might just snap off. So they are definitely a must swap out as far as I'm concerned. So I've gone with the Trijicon HDs on this. I love the Trijicon HDs. I don't know if you can see that sight. I love the front, very bright sight, and the tritium inserts are certainly bright at night. I think they're great. The one criticism I have of these they are certainly expensive. Trijicon is very proud of its product for sure, but I suppose you get what you pay for. It's a top quality sight, especially with that high-vis front sight. It does also have a wall and back, so again, if you need to do any one-handed manipulations, you certainly can. It'll catch your belt, catch the side of a table, anything like that. As far as the Shield stock sights are good enough sights. They're a three-dot white setup. I think they're Novak style. They're drift adjustable, and they're steel sights. They're great. I like them quite a bit. But the factory sights, a couple of criticisms about it, or really just one. They're flat up front, kind of that standard again Novak style sight. And you can't do any sort of a one-handed manipulation or anything like that. So as you can see, I've also swapped this out, and I've done the same thing. I've gone with the Trijicon HDs on this as well, with this being in mind as a primary carry like my 43 is. The HD sights are without question my favorite from a carry standpoint. And you'll notice that this does have the ledge on it as well, just like the 43 does. So I think these are great sights to use for a carry gun. They're great at the range as well. Very easy to pick up, not only during the day, but of course at night. Those tritium vials grow very brightly. So let's talk a little bit about ease of use, ease of maintenance, and taking care of these firearms. As a lot of you know, Glocks are extremely easy to care for. There's not a lot to them, very basic. One criticism that people have, when you go to disassemble the Glock, you do have to pull the trigger on it. I don't have a problem with that, largely because I make sure that my guns are very clear, very free of any ammo. I don't keep any ammo on my cleaning table. Everything is always put away in boxes long before I do any cleaning, and I always safety check several times. In fact, I just, anytime I pick up a gun, I safety check it. You may not see me do it in this video the whole time because I've been sitting here the whole time in front of the guns, but out of habit, anytime I pick up a gun to handle it or manipulate it or certainly take it apart, I'm going to make sure that it's free and clear. And in this case, this one is, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the trigger. And then I wrap my hand around the back of the gun, and I do pull it back just a little bit, and I pull down on the slide lock. That's this little tab. It's on both sides here. I pull it down, and that does free your slide up. One bummer about the 43, and please correct me in the comments, I've not been able to find any extended slide locks for the 43 yet. I do have them for my full frame Glocks, any of those. I think it makes it just a little bit easier to take down, and it does not protrude far enough to where it grabs clothing or a holster or anything like that. I do like those. Haven't found them for this yet, and I'm hoping to at some point, but either way, it's not difficult to pull apart. And once you do, you've got your slide and your last couple of components for your basic field stripping. You've got your recoil spring and guide rod. This is polymer, and it is dual captive. And then you've got your barrel. So not a lot to it. Glocks are extremely easy to clean. They're easy to get into any nooks and crannies or anything like that. I use polymer picks and patches, that sort of thing, so I'm not marring any of the finish, and I'm able to get in and really clean out the slide rails, all of that. So I'll set that aside. And the Smith & Wesson Shield, I'm going to get my Glock disassembly tool. Ironically, hopefully Smith & Wesson's not watching this. I'm pretty sure they're not. Smith & Wesson Shield, it's not a lot more difficult to get apart, but there are a couple of things about it. You do need to lock the slide back, and that's a good opportunity to once again check and make sure that it's free and clear, and it is. Once you do that, you swing down your takedown lever there, and if you wanted to, you could go ahead and release the slide and pull the trigger and disassemble it. However, Smith & Wesson has included a little tab in there. You're probably not going to be able to see it. I'm trying to get the light to where you can see it, but there's a steel tab in there, and if I'm able to get it to go down, I'm using a Glock disassembly tool, and the Smith probably knows it. But that tab I was able to swing down, and what that does, when you go to release the slide, it makes it so you do not have to pull the trigger. I don't mind pulling the trigger on a striker-fired gun as long as I've checked to make sure that it's free and clear. It doesn't bother me a bit. However, if you have the option to not do it, that's fine as well. And then it's the same basic components as the Glock. You're going to get your guide rod and spring. Now this is actually steel. That's fine. I'm not sure there's really that much of a difference between the two other than weight. As far as longevity, I don't know how often people have to switch out a polymer guide rod versus a steel one. I mean, I suppose you might have to do it every once in a while if you're shooting tens of thousands of rounds. But I, generally speaking, am not. So functionality, I don't really. It doesn't bother me a bit. I'm not terribly concerned about that. But now that they're apart, again, there aren't a lot of differences. The Smith barrel is a little bit shorter, as I said when I was giving the stats on that. But other than that, everything else is basically the same. And then to put them all back together, let's see if I can do this on camera. For the Glock, just throw the barrel back in and make sure that it's seated. And then I put my spring and guide rod in, and I do make sure that it is flush against the barrel lug. I do believe that's the barrel lug. So I just make sure that it's flush. And then I put it back together. I do have to wiggle it just a little bit to get it back in, but once it's in, rack the slide and I check for functionality. It does work, so we're good to go with that. And with the Smith, it's the same operation. Now, one thing I've noticed with the Smith, and this is not the first shield that I've owned. I've owned a couple of shields over time. I had an earlier shield when they first came out, and one criticism I had of that particular shield that I have not run into yet with this one, although I probably will on camera, the spring and guide rod were a little bit finicky, and every once in a while they did not really want to sit in there properly, so I was not able to put the gun back together, put the slide back on the frame properly. This one doesn't seem to have that issue, so I'll go ahead and put that back on. You have to lock the slide. Okay, see there, it's doing it. I'm going to keep that on camera, and hopefully you'll notice that it did that. Now let's see if I can get it in there this time. All right, winner. So then I do need to take my disassembly lever and put it back. Now, one thing you'll notice, that little lever that I put down to release the slide, it's still down. It does not go back up automatically, so the gun will not fire. So what you need to do is either take your disassembly tool and put it back up, or with a magazine, whether it's a full magazine or empty, I'd say empty unless you're planning on carrying it or you're at the range, you can insert the magazine and that'll actually put the lever back up in its normal position. And once you've done that, oh, sorry, I bumped the camera there a little bit. Once you've done that, check for functionality. It does work. Everything is good to go. So both guns, easy to disassemble and take apart. One thing I didn't know while the Smith was apart, I find it's a little bit more challenging to clean. I have to work a little bit harder to get into the nooks and crannies. The slide is not just straight back. There's a little bit of a curve around the firing pin safety or plunger, whatever you want to call it. So I have to work just a little bit harder, so it might take 2 extra minutes, maybe 3 extra minutes, not that big of a deal. But if you're not one to really like gun cleaning, you just want to get it over and done with, I'd give the edge to the Glock just by a hair. I love cleaning guns. I love taking them apart, so it's not a big deal to me, and I don't mind taking a couple of extra minutes to make sure that everything is clean and working properly. Not a big deal to me. So again, not a lot of differences between the two from a maintenance standpoint, field stripping standpoint. They're both pretty easy. The Glock, you have to pull the trigger. The Smith, you do have the option with a disassembly tool or some sort of pick or something to put that lever down. You don't have to pull the trigger at that point in time. All right, so how do these two compare to each other at the range? Let's take a look at a little bit of shooting. Okay, so both of these guns, from a 7 to 10 yard range, I'm sure some of you like to shoot a little bit further out than that, but for a small self-defense, certainly single stack gun, I prefer to keep it somewhere in the 7 to 10 yard range. When I'm at the range, I might even bring it up just a little bit shorter than that if I'm doing rapid fire drills or anything like that. I don't consider these to be reach out and touch you past about the 10-yard range. I think that's beyond what these were really intended for. I know you can do it. I know Hickok can hit the gong at the other end of the hill, but from a practical standpoint, I keep these pretty up close and personal. They both shoot well. Again, the 43 has been 100% reliable since day one, and it probably has around 800 to 1,000 rounds through it, maybe a little bit more than that, and it's been a flawless shooter. You may have noticed, however, that I don't shoot it quite as well. You might attribute it to the grip angle, you might attribute it to just having a smaller grip, or it could be the trigger, it's a little bit heavier trigger, or it could be me, probably that. But it still puts rounds on target, center mass where I want them to be, and I don't consider any of these firearms to be precision firearms. That's where we really get into full frame, longer firearms, heavier firearms, where I consider those to be more competition worthy, more accuracy worthy. I'm really not going for that when I go to the range. I go to put rounds on center mass at a certain distance, at a certain speed, to make sure that I can do that properly. But the Glock 43, I don't shoot quite as well as I do the Shield. Again, might be that grip length, might be the trigger, it's just a little bit smoother trigger. It might be the sight picture on that. It could be just that extra couple of ounces or ounce or two in that. I don't really know what to attribute it to, or the grip angle potentially, but I do shoot it just a little bit better. So from a marksman standpoint, I suppose, I would give the edge to this Shield, although, again, from a reliability standpoint, and that is critical to me, right now the 43 has it hands down. I've got hundreds more rounds to put through this before I feel like it's really reliable. But both a lot of fun to shoot at the range. You can shoot both of these all day long, which is really nice. Some of those really small single stack firearms, whether it be the cars or even the Springfield XDS, things like that, I feel like those are a little bit more brutal on your hands, or at least for me, I don't feel like really shooting something like that all day long. Or when you get into really the micro guns like the Ruger LCPs, whether even the new one, I haven't had a chance to shoot it yet, although I have handled it. It does have a better grip than it used to. Those are still tiny guns, and you can feel them a little bit more. 42, the Glock 42 might be a little bit of an exception. I don't have one here anymore. I actually sold my 42, but I consider that more of an all-day shooter if you really wanted to. It was just big enough to where you could get away with shooting it pretty much all day, but certainly a very much a concealment or even a deep concealment gun if necessary. Again, both guns a lot of fun to shoot. Both are certainly shooters. This one's about 98.5% there. Not quite there yet, but hopefully we'll get there soon. So to wrap things up with these, both the Glock 43 and the Shield 9mm are great firearms. They're both well made. They're easy to maintain. They're fun to shoot at the range. Once this gets up to snuff with the round count, then I will certainly carry it and carry them both proudly. They're both just a lot of fun, and hopefully you've had some good experiences with these. If you do have them, if you're looking to buy one, I'm not sure I could tell you which one is better. The Glock's going to be maybe just a little bit more expensive, so you're looking at more of an expense with the Glock. I think they're probably retailing, depending on where you live, between $425 and $475, and the Shields, sometimes you can find Shields for under $400. Certainly on the used market you can, and they're pretty prevalent. In fact, both of these are pretty prevalent. I haven't seen any 43s on Arms List for a while, but I'm sure they're out there. But from a cost standpoint, neither one of these are going to break the bank. You're looking at under $500, and in some cases under $400 for both of these. That's not entirely too bad. All right, YouTube, again, this is KS Gun Guide. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the video, and I'll catch you next time.